Hello and welcome to part 3 of lesson 7.2.4. If you haven't already watched parts 1 and 2, go ahead and watch those first. They'll be linked in the description below. For part 3, we're going to start by looking at problem 7-154. Go ahead and pause the video to read the problem and part A now and see what it's asking you to do. Pause the video now to read. Now that you've read the problem, let's look at what it's asking you to do. You don't have a partner, so it's asking you to sketch a graph of the equation you receive from the other pair of students. So since you don't have a partner, let's just look at this equation I'm giving you right now. So the equation I'm giving you is y equals 3 times sine of 2 times x plus pi over 2 plus 2. So you can use Desmos to help you graph this on your paper. Go ahead and try to graph this now. Now that you've graphed, I want you to tell me what the amplitude is, what the horizontal shift is, the midline, the period, and the orientation. So let's start by writing down what the amplitude is. Pause the video now to write down the amplitude. So now that you've written down your amplitude, let's check if you're correct. So the amplitude, if we look at the last problem that we did, was the number that was in front of our sine or cosine. That number in this case is 3, so that means our amplitude is 3. Now that we have our amplitude, let's go ahead and write down what your horizontal shift is. Pause the video now to write down the horizontal shift. Now that you've written down your horizontal shift, let's see if we have the same one. So we can see on the problem last time that our horizontal shift is the opposite of whatever h is. So up here it was pi over 2, it was negative pi over 2, so our horizontal shift is pi over 2. Right here it's positive pi over 2, so that means our horizontal shift is negative pi over 2, or pi over 2 units to the left. Be sure to be checking the graph that you've already made while you're writing down all of these attributes of your graph to make sure that you graphed it correctly. Now that you've written down the amplitude and the horizontal shift, let's go ahead and write down your midline. You can look at your graph and see if you have it correct. Now that you've written down your midline, let's double check what it is. So last problem we saw that this K right here was our midline. In this case, our K is 2, so our midline is 2. Check that your graph has a midline of 2. And then try to find the period of this graph. And check that it works on your graph. Pause the video now to find the period. Now that you've found the period, let's talk about it. So in the problem before, we found this b, and we knew that period is equal to 2 pi over b. So our period, this is our b here, is equal to 2 pi over 2, which is equal to pi. So we have a period of pi. Make sure to check that the period on your graph is the same as this period. And lastly, what is the orientation? Is it a sine or a cosine graph, and is it flipped or is it not flipped? Go ahead and write down the orientation now. Now that you've written down the orientation, let's talk about it. So in the previous problem, we said that if there was a positive in this parentheses, that it wasn't flipped, and if there was a negative in these parentheses, that it was flipped. And we can tell if it's a cosine or a sine graph just by looking if it says cosine or sine. So in this case, there's no negative sign, so the 3 is positive right here, and it's a sine graph, so it is a sine graph, and it's not flipped. Now that we've written all of this down, let's go ahead and graph it on Desmos to see visually if you have your graph correct. So let's go to Desmos. I'm going to clear out my graph from last time. And we have y equals 3 times sine of 2x, delete 2 parenthesis, x plus pi over 2. Then we need to close our parentheses. And what was that midline? Plus 2. So let's check. We said our midline was 2. It's easiest just to see by graphing that midline. This looks like it's directly in half. Is it shifted to the left, pi over 2? Let's check. It starts right here in the middle. Goes all the way down, all the way up. And it might not look like it's shifted right away, but actually if you look at it, our graph should start pi over 2 to the left, right? So let's see right here. It starts pi over 2 to the left. So it might look like right here at 0, 2 is where it starts. But remember that this is a positive sine graph, so it should be going up first. And right here, it's going up first. So it's shifted pi over 2 to the left, and it starts with the amplitude of 2, so that's good. It goes all the way up to 5. So from 2 to 5 is 3 units. 5 minus 2 is 3. So that amplitude is correct. It is 3. And then let's see how long of a period we have. The graph goes up, down, and back up between negative pi over 2 and pi over 2, which is pi units. So our period is correct. So if your graph does not look like this one, please check your graph. And if you have any questions, be sure to sign into Google Meets. Check with your teacher to see when your Google Meets are for your class.